All righty, folks. Well, good afternoon to you all. Welcome to our third edition of our video conferencing. I see a lot of folks have joined us this afternoon. My name is Bruce Cladney, and I'm the Executive Director for the Kansas Association of Counties. And if you're new to the video conference method that we've been using, this is our third installment that we've been working with you all for the past couple of weeks since the pandemic started. And so, like I said, this is the third installment. The first two have actually been recorded, so you can check them out on our KAC website at kansascounties.org. Kim Hall, who's our Education and Communications Manager, has been working feverishly to add all sorts of relevant and important information. She works tirelessly to sift through all of the materials that come across our desk and through our inboxes, and she posts the stuff that we feel is the most important and pertinent to your operations at the county level. So check those out. The first one we hosted was Continuity of Operations that Jay and I put together a couple of weeks ago. That's up there on the website. And then also the one we had last week, which was a joint effort between us at KAC and the good folks at KCAMP. And that discussion was Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And we had an outside consultant by the name of Tracy Gould who put that one on for us. And we did have some questions throughout the presentation in the chat box. We captured those, sent those over to Tracy, and she responded back to us, and then we have since posted that up on the website. So if you were one of the folks that was with us last week and had one of the questions asked, please check out our website and you'll find a PDF document that has all those questions plus the answers included. So please check that out, www.kansascounties.org. So coronavirus update, the latest from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. If you have not been checking that out, we have had 428 positive cases across the state in a wide variety of counties. So we've got a full graphic there on our website, so check that out and you can see the distribution. My home county, where I currently am at in Bonner Springs, Kansas, of Wyandotte County, we've got 79 cases to date. So it looks like Johnson County with 134 has the most, followed by us in Wyandotte, followed by Sedgwick at 58. So unfortunately, that number continues to rise, and we need to keep in mind that that we need to do everything we possibly can to slow the spread of this horrible virus. So a couple of things before we get started with today's program. A couple of things to point your attention to, and I'll remind us of this at the end of this presentation as well, is that we're hopefully going to have two presentations, or at least there are going to be two presentations on Thursday the 2nd. So in just a couple of days. We do know that FEMA has reached out to us and we have pushed this out to you. So hopefully you have seen it, but they are going to, FEMA is going to have a Region 7 training on how to access certain materials during this time and what you need to be doing to keep FEMA in mind when you make those purchases or those procurements. And so they are going to have an online training on Thursday at 10:30 in the morning. So check out that link on our website and as well as the email that we sent to you. There's a link to the document that talks all about what this is and how to get registered and how to participate. They're going to be using a little bit different format. They're using Adobe Connect, which is a platform that I'm kind of familiar with, and it does work very similar to Zoom, but it is just a little bit different. So make sure that you check that out and pass that along to your emergency management folks or anybody else that needs to be involved in the decision making when it comes to purchasing materials during this pandemic. And then the second presentation that we're trying to nail down is actually a presentation or a discussion with Congressman Estes. His office reached out to us yesterday and we tried to schedule a meeting with him. And in fact, we had it scheduled for 11 o'clock on Thursday. However, when we found out that FEMA was doing theirs at 10:30, we are trying to push the congressman back and have something in the afternoon on Thursday. So please mark your calendars and pencil to be on the lookout for a Zoom link on Thursday and hopefully we'll have an interactive discussion with Congressman Estes about all of the different funding packages and all of the different stuff that is available to us at the county level. So with no further ado, let's introduce Legislative Policy Director, as well as the Chief Legal Counsel for the Kansas Association of Counties. And Jay has put together a presentation for us this afternoon entitled Kansas Statewide Stay-at-Home Order Discussion. And so when the governor announced her Executive Order 2016, the statewide stay-at-home order on March the 28th, we decided that that needed to be put front and center, and we needed to get everybody on board on what that means for your counties. And so Jay has been working all day today to put together a presentation so that we can be a little bit more informed about what that means for our counties, our operations, and our own stay-at-home orders that we've already established in our home counties. So with that, Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Bruce. This is Jay Hall, your Legislative Policy Director and General Counsel. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to talk to you about the governor's executive order, and then also just about some things you should have in mind as you work through that executive order and into the future. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I've put together a brief PowerPoint presentation for that. All right, so we have our Executive Order 20-16, which, as I said, is the stay-at-home order that was issued by the governor. And we're going to cover what's in that order, as well as what you should have in mind when you're working through that order locally. Before I get into that, as Bruce mentioned, we have a lot of resources on our KAC page. And so if you want to visit kansascounties.org, we have a lot of information on COVID-19 and some good resources there that you can make use of. You can also follow us on Twitter at Kansas Counties. We're pushing out information as fast as we get it on social media, so feel free to check in with us on social media to keep track of the latest and what's going on the COVID-19 situation, the response information, both statewide and nationally. Just a handful of reminders before I get into the actual meat of the presentation today. And that's obviously remember to social distance. And that goes for whether or not you're at home working, or also if you are still working in the office, obviously you want to social distance. Even when we're going out to perform some of those essential functions, some of the things that we have to do, like going and getting groceries and things like that, just please remember to social distance. That will help us hopefully flatten the curve and prevent ourselves from overwhelming our healthcare system while we are trying to overcome the COVID-19 situation. Also, please check on the elderly and those living alone within your communities. A lot of times we forget about some of those people because of the things we have going on, but please check on the elderly and those living alone. Also, make sure you're checking on your county staff. Everyone has a lot more on their plate today than they probably expected to have on their plate right now. So make sure you're checking on your staff, particularly if you're working with first responders or in some of the offices that have had to move things around and move staff around. Make sure you're checking on everyone to make sure they have the things that they need. And obviously, last but not least, make sure you're checking on yourself to make sure you're getting the kind of rest that you need. Make sure that you aren't falling ill yourself. We have a lot of things we have to take care of, and it's important that we make sure and take care of ourselves. As a reminder as well, we're also pushing out information on the KAC Facebook page. I didn't include that link on the presentation, but please make sure you're also checking out our Facebook page where we're also posting updates. Now, getting into the executive order 20-16. Obviously, there was a U.S. public health emergency that was declared all the way back on January 27th of 2020. So late January of this year is when we actually had the official public health emergency declaration. Governor Kelly then issued a statewide disaster declaration on March the 12th. And the next day, President Trump issued a national disaster declaration, and he backdated that to March 20th. That means that for any states that are having FEMA claims, they can be dated as far back as March the 1st. Leading up to Executive Order 20-16, we had several other executive orders, and I want to touch on just a handful of those right now. Executive Order 20-5 prohibited utility and internet disconnections during the COVID-19 crisis. So during the entirety of the governor's disaster declaration, however long that goes, you cannot have utility and internet disconnections. Executive Order 20-07 temporarily closed the public schools temporarily closed Kansas schools rather, for K through 12, and it closed those through the remainder of the school year. I know that that came as a bit of a shock, but that actually happened here a couple of weeks ago, that we had that executive order come out. Executive Order 20-10 prohibited certain foreclosures and evictions, and this was adjusted from Executive Order 20-04, which had prohibited foreclosures and evictions, but this had some clarifying language in it so that it was clear that this applied not just to banks, but also to apartment complexes, just so that it would be clear that if individuals were being laid off as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, that they would not be in a situation where they were being put out of their living situation as a result. And then Executive Order 20-14 prohibited mass gatherings of 10 or more, and this also modified a previous executive order that had lowered the mass gatherings down to no more than 50. So you can kind of see the progression of how these executive orders were more and more strict as we move forward. And finally, Executive Order 20-15, which established the Kansas Essential Function Framework. And this executive order was important because this executive order laid out a framework that we'll talk about a little bit more as I get into Executive Order 20-16. But the reason that the Essential Function Framework was outlined in Executive Order 20-15 was to give some statewide consistency. There's been a lot of confusion and a lot of upheaval about what is an essential function and what is not an essential function. And so just to clarify that, the governor issued Executive Order 20-15 to clarify what those essential functions were in Kansas and hopefully bring a little bit more consistency to what was going on. Now, the basics of the order are as follows. It was effective as of March 30th, 2020. So as of yesterday, the executive order went into place, and it is currently in place so that there is a statewide stay-at-home order. The order, as of right now, will terminate on April the 19th of this year. So here in about 3 weeks is when the order actually will terminate. However, it is important to note that the order could be extended through either another executive order, which would obviously require that the Legislative Coordinating Council review that order, but this order could be extended beyond April the 19th of 2020. So while we can look at it right now as an order that will extend for 3 weeks, we need to also be aware that this order could be extended, and we could be talking about an order that stretches further than April the 19th. So keep that in mind as you're planning for how to handle this particular executive order. Now, along with everything else that I've already mentioned, there are numerous exceptions under this executive order, and they're laid out in what's called the Kansas Essential Function Framework. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that. This particular framework lays out 4 basic categories of the types of things that are deemed essential functions. One thing that's important to note is that while a function may be deemed as essential, it's still important to know that if you can perform that function remotely in order to maintain social distancing and flatten the curve, if you can perform those functions remotely, you should still try to do that. So even though, for example, government is an essential function, it is commendable if we are able to perform those functions either remotely or without coming into contact with other people, so that we can get these things done without potentially exposing other individuals to the COVID-19 virus or having ourselves exposed to the virus. Now, Executive Order 20-16 also supersedes all of the existing local orders. This means that, for example, for the roughly 30 counties that had already put out orders, this executive order supersedes those local orders. So rather than dealing with the patchwork framework that we had where some counties had an order and others did not, or where some counties had specific things that were deemed essential while others did not have necessarily those same lists, it's important to note that under Executive Order 20-16, all of those other orders are superseded. Now, while those orders are superseded under the current executive order, it's also important to note that when the statewide order expires, whether that's April 19th or whether it's extended into the future on or before April the 19th, those local orders would go back into effect at that time, or localities could put into place a new order if it were necessary to do so at that time. So this doesn't prevent local county governments from putting into place a new order after the statewide order expires. It simply supersedes them during the duration of the statewide order. So let's talk a little bit about the essential function framework. It has 4 basic tenets to it, and those are to connect, manage, distribute, and then and it looks like the slide got slid down, but it's to connect, manage, distribute, and supply. And so let's talk a little bit about each of those and kind of some of the things that fall underneath each of those things. For connecting, we want to make sure that we're operating things like information technology, internet services, obviously, the kinds of things that we're using right now as individuals are working from home. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about in connection. So satellite, radios, cybersecurity, all of those types of things would fall under connecting. Then we want to talk about distribution. And this is everything from supply chains for food, passenger transportation, electricity, oil and gas pipelines, all of those types of things are the types of things we're talking about under distribute. When we look at manage, this is the types of things that we're going to deal with, particularly in government functions, things like law enforcement, education, elections, wastewater, hazardous materials and waste, other government operations such as government contracts, constitutional and legislative duties. All of those types of things are under the management or the manage section of this particular executive order. And then finally we have supply, and again this is where we're dealing with a lot of our agriculture things, along with farming and all of those things that go into that, along with obviously serving meals for takeout or delivery, groceries, all of those things that we need to do to maintain and supply people with the things that they need on a regular basis. Now, along with kind of some of the obvious things that are being provided, we also have a lot of other things that may not jump to mind immediately about as far as being an essential service, but those are things such as operating laundry services, banking services, which obviously we certainly need, preserving constitutional rights, things like providing legal services, which as an attorney, I'm glad that we were deemed essential. Also manufacturing and selling firearms, attending and performing religious services. Those things are also preserved under this executive order. But it is important to note that even in doing those things, it is still important to maintain the social distancing, even while performing those functions. And that's outlined really in section C, which talks about following the appropriate safety protocols, including maintaining a 6-foot distance between individuals and following all of the other directives regarding social distancing, hygiene, which includes things like hand washing, and other efforts that will help slow the spread of COVID-19. So even while performing any of these essential functions that have been outlined in this executive order, it's important that you remember that even when doing those things, you still need to follow the appropriate safety protocols. So make sure that you are encouraging county staff to do that as you work in your counties, and also make sure that people understand within your counties as your residents that even when doing these essential functions, they still need to follow the appropriate safety protocols and the things like social distancing and hand washing, even while performing essential functions. And that's just so that we can make sure that we're doing everything we can to hopefully limit the spread of COVID-19. Now, if you have questions, the governor's office has set up a website that can handle these questions. So you can either visit the website, which is www.governor.kansas.gov/KEFF. Again, that's www.governor.kansas.gov/KEFF. Or you can also email the governor's office at keff@ks.gov. And they are staffing those two things in order to make sure that they can answer questions about what is and is not essential, whether or not specific things fall into those essential categories that have been outlined under the essential function framework, and how those things work together. So if you have questions, feel free to visit that website or also email the governor's office. They're trying to get out as much direction and information as they can through those two sites. And so if you have questions, please do not hesitate to make use of those resources. So let's talk a little bit about local orders. As I said, this executive order supersedes any local order that is currently out there. It doesn't matter if the local order is more strict than the executive order. It doesn't matter if the executive order or the local order is less strict than the executive order. The executive order controls during the entirety of the existence of that executive order. And basically what that means is that right now, the entire state of Kansas is under the jurisdiction of the executive order. Now, once that executive order expires at whatever time that is, at that point, local orders can go back into effect. But as of right now, no county government can issue an executive or can issue a local order that is either more strict or less strict than what is currently in Executive Order 20-16. So keep that in mind as well. You don't need to worry about right now if your county needs to put an order into place, because as of right now, until April the 19th, the executive order will control. Now, what happens after April the 19th, we'll get to in just a moment. But as of right now, you don't have to worry about whether or not you need to put in place a new order, because the executive order would control. Now, as I said, local orders, they can go back into effect after Executive Order 20-16 expires. So, for example, there were several orders that had been issued that were 30-day safer at home or stay at home orders that were issued by several different counties. And those orders actually extended to the 24th or 25th of April. If the executive order were to expire on April the 19th, as is currently scheduled, those orders would go back into place. And so for the last 4 or 5 or 6 days of the existence of those orders would control locally. Now, obviously, those orders would not extend beyond the jurisdiction of that particular county, but those orders would control in the county. So if you're in some of the counties that had executed those orders prior to Executive Order 20-16, then those orders would go back into effect as of the expiration of the executive order. So keep that in mind as you're looking at your orders, because whether or not your orders were more or less strict than Executive Order 20-16, once this executive order expires, your local order may go back into effect. And that's something that you need to be very clear about when you're communicating with your county residents, so that they understand that even after Executive Order 20-16 expires, there may be a period of time where a local order goes back into effect after this executive order has expired. So I want to give you now a handful of takeaways. And so we'll take up first those that have a local order. The first thing you want to think about is you need to determine if your local order needs to extend beyond the state order. And things that you might want to think about when you're looking at that is what the level of spread within your community is, and what the level of spread within your region is. I mean, obviously right now, the spread has been pretty aggressive in the Kansas City metropolitan area. But if after April the 19th, we look and we see that, and hopefully this isn't the case, obviously, but we see that the spread has moved into another area of the state, it may be prudent, even if the executive order expires, for us to put in, for those communities where there is still some active spread, to put in orders that extend their stay at home or their safer at home orders beyond April the 19th, just for the safety of the residents and the individuals in those communities. You also need to be thinking about if you're going to need further restrictions after the state order has expired. And again, you're going to be wanting to look at what the level of spread is within your community, and working with your health officer to determine what the needs of your community are once the executive order has expired, and whether you can expire your order at that same time or whether you need something more. You'll also need to determine how you're going to restart services. It's not as simple as flipping a switch once April the 19th rolls around, or once your local order has expired. You're going to have to think about how you're going to restart services and reopen your courthouse and all of those things, and when that's going to be done and how that's going to be announced, as well as how you're going to instill confidence in the public that it is safe to come back to some of those community gathering places like courthouses and restaurants and things like that, without sparking a potential for respread of the virus. Now, obviously, if you don't have a local order, you're thinking about many of those same things, but you're going to want to really, really track during the duration of the statewide order whether or not the virus is progressing in your community. And again, working with your health officer to make sure that you understand whether or not you're going to need to put into place a local order upon the expiration of the statewide order. You're also going to want to look and track the virus progression in your region, because while you may not have a lot of active cases in your county, we know that in Kansas, a lot of our people travel from one county to the next on a very regular basis. So even if you don't have any cases right there in your county, if you have hot spots in and around your region, you may have to think about what that means for your county specifically. And then obviously the last 2 points are the same 2 points that are had if you have a local order already. How are you going to restart services once the statewide order expires? And how are you going to give your residents confidence that it is safe to, again, come out and congregate in some of the places where they are used to congregating within your community? It's also important to make sure that as you're rolling those services out again, and as you're reopening your courthouse and things like that, that you don't unintentionally spark respread of the virus. So those are things that should be thought about and talked about and planned even as the executive order is in place, so that when it comes time for that executive order to expire, your county is ready to proceed with the next step of either restarting services or possibly establishing or extending an existing order if that's necessary. The final handful of takeaways is, as always, people have talked about we're all in this together, and that couldn't be more true as we look at what's going on here in this COVID-19 situation. We have to think beyond our borders. We have to really think regionally, and not just regionally as far as the few counties that are around your area, but also regionally as far as what's going on in neighboring states as well, because we know that we have a lot of traffic that comes through Kansas given its placement on the map. And so we have to really think beyond our borders and think what is going on in the states and the localities around us to make sure that we understand what needs to be done to protect the people of Kansas. We also need to think beyond the deadlines that have been established in either the statewide executive order, or also thinking beyond the deadlines that are established in your local orders. I just talked about making sure that we are prepared to restart services. So we need to think beyond, okay, when April 20th rolls around, we will just restart services. Well, we need to have a plan for how that will be done and how we will roll out our services again. We need to have a plan for if we need to extend a local stay home order beyond that. So we need to really think beyond these initial deadlines and have in place a plan for what we will do if we need to extend those deadlines, or for how we will restart what we would, I guess, call normal life once this COVID-19 crisis comes to an end. Part of that thinking beyond those deadlines and thinking beyond our borders is making sure that we are coordinating with both the cities that are within our counties and also with regional leaders, so that we make sure that everybody is on the same page, because it doesn't help us if one city and one county, or another city or another county, if we take care of what we need to within our borders, but we aren't coordinated with how that works within our region. So make sure that you are coordinating with all of the other leaders within your region, so that as these times come closer for these deadlines to roll away, that we are prepared to move forward. Communicate, communicate, communicate. It is always so important that we are talking with the leaders around us, with our state and legislative leaders, that we're talking with our national leaders as well, that we have an understanding of what's going on. Part of the part of the reason that we were bringing in Representative Estes this week, and that we actually moved that call so that you can also get on the FEMA call, is because it is so important for us to communicate so that we can make sure that every single county in Kansas gets what they need, whether that's through the disaster funding or through the information that the federal government is providing, or also just so that we understand what's coming next from the federal level as far as what the federal level is going to do. And then finally, as I've noticed that we've had more and more attendance on these briefing calls, just continue to utilize KAC for our resources and the information that we're pushing out. We're going to continue to provide as much information as possible and give you as much up-to-date information as we possibly can, so that you have the information to make the best decisions for your local county that you possibly can with the most information that you can utilize. And so that's it. That is really what we're looking at from the perspective of what we're looking at for Executive Order 20-16. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via either email or via phone. I'm always happy to answer questions, even though I'm sitting here in my kitchen right now working from home. I am more than happy to take phone calls. You can reach me on my office number, or you can also reach me via email. So please do not hesitate to reach out to me, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
All righty, Jay, thank you so much for putting this on. And we had 128 members join us. So I'm glad that you folks stuck it out. And for those of you that joined us just a little bit late, just a real quick reminder that all of these tapes, all of the links to these videos are posted to our website. So like Jay said, go to our KAC website, kansascounties.org, and you'll find links there. And then also put on your calendar that Thursday, we're hopefully going to have Congressman Estes join us in the afternoon. And then also don't forget that the FEMA has a training on Thursday morning at 10:30. And so we have sent out to you an advertisement or a link to that, as well as there's a link on our website to announce that training. You'll find out more about COVID-19 guidance on procurements under grants during periods of emergency or exigency. So very, very important that you check that out and see if that is appropriate for you to participate in. I know I'm going to be involved in that, so I can find out what's going on. So with that, we're going to wrap this session up. Again, Jay, thank you so very much for putting this together. And thanks, Kim, for keeping us updated on the website. Go there, and like Jay said, email us with any questions that you might have. I saw that there was one chat in the chat box. We're going to capture that. And actually, we're going to reach out, Sharms, S-H-A-R-M-S, Sharms. If you wouldn't mind emailing me who you are, we're going to email directly back to you with the answer. So give me an email, Cladney@kansascounties.org, and we'll email you back so we find out who Sharms is. So with that, folks, have a great rest of the day, and stay safe, and hopefully stay healthy, okay? Take care, everybody.